Hello, good evening everyone and welcome. We'll just wait for a couple of minutes until everyone has joined. We might wait maybe until 1 or 2 minutes past 6. So hi again to everyone that's just joined. We'll give another minute or two to give people a couple of minutes to get in and connect to their audio. So good evening to everyone that's just joined. You are in the right place. We're just going to wait another minute or two to give stragglers a minute to get in. We'll kick off at 2 minutes past 6. Okay, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to the SciWem webinar on challenges to climate action, Thames Water's approach to net zero carbon emissions. SciWem has switched to the virtual world, reaching out to a global audience, providing relevant and accessible events to our community working on water and the environmental sector. So SciWem are now connecting locally, nationally and internationally through digital series. This particular event is hosted by SciWem Republic of Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland branch are hosting 4 online events in 2021 with climate action as a theme. And this is the second of our 4 events. My name is Laura Foley. I'm the Secretary of the Republic of Ireland branch of SciWem. I work for an environmental and engineering consultancy called CDM Smith, who are very active in the water sector. Barbara Woods from SciWem headquarters, and I coordinated this event. So I'll briefly run through some of the housekeeping for the event and introduce you to our chair for the event, David McHugh, before handing over to David to introduce our speaker, Andy Dunn. So firstly, some general housekeeping. So the webinar will be recorded and with the permission of our speaker will be available online. You can view digital past series at the SciWem Videos YouTube channel. If you experience any technical issues and need assistance, please use the chat feature on Zoom to let us know and we'll give you a hand. We'd really love questions and comments on Andy's presentation. So please use the questions and answer or Q&A facility to post your questions and comments. At the end, we'll have a discussion and we'll pass these questions to Andy. So importantly, please use the chat function for technical issues only, and please use the Q&A function for questions and comments for Andy. SciWem don't provide CPD certificates. However, this webinar does count for 1 hour of CPD. And the next event in our SciWem Republic of Ireland series on climate action will take place on the 19th of May. It'll be a panel discussion on phosphorus recovery and reuse from wastewater. And the panelists will look at the feasibility of recovering marketable phosphorus products from wastewater. As with this evening's webinar, it's free to attend, but you do have to go and register to get the Zoom link. And you can do this at sciwem.org. And you'll find lots of other events and activities at sciwem.org. Or Barbara will actually paste a couple of these into the chat box now that you might be interested in. Okay, to the main event. David McHugh has kindly agreed to chair the event. David is a past president of SciWem, the Republic of Ireland branch, and David is the director of RPS Ireland. So I'll hand over to David to introduce Andy and to crack on with the webinar.
Great, thanks Laura. Thanks for opening up proceedings, and thank you to the Republic of Ireland branch for organising this event with support from Barbara and the team in Saffron Hill. So this event, I suppose, fits in the context of a theme that SciWem is focusing on for the current year, 2020 to 2021. It's running a series of webinars focused on net zero. And that has its roots in the declaration made about a year and a half ago that SIWEM made of a climate and ecological emergency. And also, I suppose, is part of a series of events in the run-up to the COP26 event in the UK later on this year. And with the focus on net zero, SIWEM is using its branches. It's encouraging its branches to explore these themes. I know Andy has given this talk in the UK. Actually, he has chaired an event on this topic in the UK, and I'm delighted that we have him this evening. A really knowledgeable guy. But just before before I introduce you to Andy, I just want to say a few more words about the declaration. And I think it was a significant step for SIWEM to take back in 2019. Not just to focus on the climate and ecological emergency, but the nuance of the declaration that it was pushing its members to go beyond the traditional role of engineers and scientists in terms of providing technical solutions, and also encouraging them to shape the policy response. So SIWEM was really empowering its 10,000 members to adopt an advocacy role on this topic and provide leadership, to its members, but to the wider public on this topic as well. So that's the context of the net zero. Now, this event is very much focused on one of the technical solutions. It's looking to the water industry in the UK, and I've been incredibly impressed by the initiative taken by the water industry, who have gone beyond, I suppose, what we have seen happen at a national level. We have seen the various pledges from Europe and from governments to achieve net zero by 2050. The water industry in the UK has actually made a pledge to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2030, which is really significant, and absolutely puts it up to the companies to step up to this. So Thames Water, one of the more significant companies in the UK, has taken a very data-based approach, in terms of identifying the emission sources right through to the solutions. So it's embracing the challenge, with significant investment being required as well. So look, it's a great opportunity for us to learn. The format today, we're going back to something of a more traditional format. I don't know about you attendees today, right? I'm sure you've been at these Zoom events where speakers get 5 minutes each before we move on, but we're taking a chance that the SIWEM attendees here will have an attention span going up to maybe half an hour, which is what Andy's technical talk is going to be. And that will be followed then by a Q&A for about 20 minutes. So just to give you a brief introduction to Andy Dunn, he is the Chief Engineer with Thames Water. So this is a role really to lead the Engineering Centre of Excellence within Thames, and that is to provide the technical heartbeat for Thames, to make sure that, the science and engineering teams are, up there with an appropriate technical strategy to ensure, not just operations and regulatory compliance, but also for topics like this to drive the carbon agenda. Andy is an industry veteran of about 30 years in the UK and internationally, and has been active throughout consultancies, contractors on client side, as he is now with Thames Water. And he's academic background, he has a PhD in wastewater reuse. So he's going to be very interested in the forthcoming webinar that Laura mentioned earlier on phosphorus reuse. Andy is a trustee with SIWEM. He sits on the trustee board and is also chair-elect, and begins his term in office as chair of SIWEM later on this year. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Andy.
Thanks, David, and thanks for the introduction. And it's great to have the opportunity to talk about something that we're certainly passionate about, I think, in SIWEM and individually, and I'm sure you all are as well, just by the very nature that you're here. I mean, it's a really important thing that we need to address as soon as possible. I'm just going to talk about Thames Water in terms of our net negative carbon ambition, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a second. But before I do that, it's worth just having a little bit about the water industry in the UK, where we are and what we're doing. So I'm just going to talk very quickly about an overview of UK water, then the Thames approach, and then, as David said, we'll go on to a few questions and answers after that. So back in 2019, there was a set of public interest commitments made by the chief executive officers of the English and Wales water companies. Scotland actually very quickly followed that on with something slightly different. Part of that public interest commitment was that we would hit net operational zero of our carbon emissions by 2030. It was deliberately ambitious. It was deliberately ahead of the UK government target of 2050. And it is quite interesting, as we're now seeing more and more announcements with COP26 coming up, that these targets are getting bigger and they're becoming more recent, or they're coming to a nearer horizon in terms of where we're going with this. So, Mr. Johnson announced last week that 2035 for an 80% reduction in carbon. Scottish Water sort of went further, but in a longer horizon. So they're looking at total net carbon, including embedded carbon. I think it's 2045 is their current target for that. The English and Wales water companies will be announcing something on that as well in the coming years to make sure that it's total carbon and not just operational carbon. But the operational carbon is the real focus to begin with. So Water UK, which is the industry body for the water industry in the UK, and actually includes Scotland, and I think it includes Northern Ireland Water. I'm not quite sure about Irish Water. They set up a bit of work to be able to create a route map to net zero in 2030. It's a long document. The summary document itself is quite big. It's publicly available. I can put the link into the chat later on if that's of use. But it is, just need to search it on Google. And all I'm going to do is just quickly summarize where people are in terms of where we're imagining the 2030 transition to net zero. So there's been quite a lot of work that's been put into this, and all the, not just water companies, but the supply chain have sort of contributed to where we're going on this. And there are just 5 things that came out of the Water UK roadmap. One was low emission vehicles. 100% of passenger vehicles and 80% of commercial vehicles converted to alternative fuels. We actually aim to get to 100% of that, and I'll go into that a little bit later, but this is where we are overall. Water and energy savings, that is really important. And we have a customer group called Waterwise in the UK. One of the key things that they say is the best way of reducing the carbon footprint of the water industry is by using less water and wasting less water. And so there's a lot of initiatives around making sure that we reduce leakage, but also working with our customers to reduce per capita consumption, the amount of water everybody uses in their houses. And that's seeing some effects already, which is great. On the wastewater side, we're also looking at making sure that we have less infiltration into our sewers. So we have to treat less water, therefore we don't need as much energy in the first place. So the use less is really important. And again, Thames have adopted that in our overall strategy. Then there's a whole issue about process emissions. We're going to be targeting a significant decrease in process emissions. By that is the treatment processes of treating wastewater particularly, but also water. A lot of wastewater treatment is helped by biological animals, bugs, bacteria, and to keep them alive, we bubble oxygen into them or bubble air. That takes up an awful lot of power. It also releases an awful lot of gas, particularly CO2, but also methane and nitrous oxide, which we'll talk about in a second as well. And we're looking to really reduce those, but also trying to create and understand where they're coming from, which is a key issue of making sure we know how to reduce those going forward. Renewable power, we call it poo power in Thames. Kids love it. Kids really sort of welcome the whole conversation about it in our outreach programs with every school in our region. We show them how you make power out of poo. Already there's 3 gigawatts of energy that's being created through new solar and wind. We also use a lot of our biogas, which I'll talk a little bit more about as well when it comes to Thames approaches, to make sure that we generate heat and power for making sure that we use less electricity internally. And then you'll see biomethane. Biomethane it needs to be improved, but fundamentally it comes off the digestion process. There is a whole approach within the UK to decarbonise the natural gas grid, making sure that we use less of the fossil fuels from the North Sea or Russia, wherever it comes from. And already we're looking at somewhere between 15 to 20% of our natural gas grid being biomethane. And the water industry is looking to really support that going forward by not just creating more biomethane, but then putting it into the grid so everybody can use it in homes. So this is one of the key pieces of work, which is where the baseline of the amount of carbon operationally is emitted by the water industry. It's 3 million tons, million tons of CO2 equivalent is produced, total emissions. You'll see that there's a net emissions element to this because quite a lot of green energy is used in terms of purchasing it in the first place. And then we just sort of show where the biggest inputs are. So you'll see down here that transport is a reasonable amount, but the biggest carbon dioxide, the dark blue ones, come from using electricity. Electricity is used in 2 main activities in the water industry. One is pumping. We have to pump a lot and we have to keep pressures in our water grid, and hence the drinking water grid electricity is really high because of that. We also use it in processing and treating water, but fundamentally it's pumping. And then in wastewater, as I said, it's aerating our sewage treatment works and processes. There's also quite a significant amount of pumping as well that comes out of that. I just wanted to point out as well, the light blue, which is methane, which is far more aggressive in terms of the greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide, which is the orange line where they come from. Methane comes a lot from our sludge processes, and we need to make sure that we capture that and we don't allow that into the atmosphere. And nitrous oxide comes from a lot of our wastewater treatment processes, particularly around making sure that we hit some of the more tighter consents that we have around ammonia and phosphorus. So part of making sure that we put less ammonia into our rivers is creating nitrous oxide, which then goes to the atmosphere. And so we need to make sure that we deal with that as well. So that's a brief overview of the water industry in general. As I said, this is all publicly available data from the Water UK roadmap. One of the commitments that every water company made was, following Water UK presenting this particular element, each individual company will issue and publish their own roadmap of how we're going to achieve it. I'm going to show some of that today in Thames. We're not going to be sharing this presentation quite yet because there's a formal launch of our roadmap next month. Once that formal launch of the roadmap is published, then we'll be able to share more information so people can hold these. But this is here for people to be able to see and talk about and ask questions later. So Thames, we are actually targeting net negative. Our objective is net negative because we believe we can get there. We believe it's really important. Not just do we know that climate change in general is a big issue around the world. For the water industry, it's sort of there in spades, to use a bridge acronym. We are seeing longer droughts. We're seeing more floods. Both of those make sure that we have to create bigger and more resilient assets for our customers. And fundamentally, it's all about making sure that when somebody turns a tap on, they get good quality water, healthy water. It always comes out of the tap, and it also tastes similar, because that's quite important as well. And to be able to do that, we have to make sure that we provide the overall resilience of our water resources all the way through to treatment, all the way to the tap. And on wastewater, well, we see some of the scenes of flooding that happens when rivers overflow. One of the worst possible things that can happen to any individual is sewer flooding into the home. We just need to stop that completely. It still happens occasionally. It's not very many homes now, but one's too many. And there's also too many pollutions that go into our rivers, either through storm overflows or through other means. And we just need to make sure that we prevent that, because nobody wants any of our sort of wastewater going in that direction. We need to be able to treat it, use it as a resource, and make sure there's no environmental harm from it whatsoever. And we also have a fantastic opportunity to generate our own electricity. We actually have a 2050 vision that's being developed to try and generate more electricity with our assets than we use. And that will be through things like solar, and you'll see the picture there that you've got floating solar panels on one of our big reservoirs, but also through wind, and very importantly through the use of biogas that we generate through anaerobic digestion as part of the sludge treatment process. So these are our Thames emissions. One of the things I think is really important to note is that we have all been on this journey for quite some time. We've actually been mitigating carbon for at least 15 years. Our emissions are something like 600 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Over the years, we've reduced that down to 258, which is our baseline at the beginning of what we call AMP6, which is the 5-year regulatory program from 2020 to 2025. We already purchased 100% renewable power, which is quite interesting, because people think that if you use less power, you're going to get a carbon benefit. Well, we don't actually see that in Thames. As the electricity grid becomes greener and greener, the benefit of that actually reduces somewhat, but we're already there and have done for some time. We also generate a lot through heat and power, particularly CHP as it's called, combined heat and power plants. But we still have our remaining emissions of 258, which we need to reduce in the next 10 years, 9 years now. Now, 60% of that actually comes from the wastewater treatment side of emissions. And that's mainly because, as I said, in water, the biggest energy use is pumping. And if our electricity is already greened, then it doesn't actually contribute to the carbon footprint. So the vast majority is in waste and sludge treatment, removing the solids that are created through the waste treatment process. And you'll see that 30% of it is actually still being used through fossil fuels. So we use fossil fuels for a number of reasons. About half of it is transport, which we believe we can green and make sure that we don't have any fossil fuels being used in our transport by 2030, if we can get there. But we also use fossil fuels for things like standby generation. So when the power goes out, it's not acceptable to stop pumping water or wastewater. So we have to create that resilience. We have a whole load of standby generators around our region, and they tend to be diesel operated. So we have some huge pumps that are diesel operated that need to be turned on in the case of events. And we're looking at what we can do with that, both in terms of using biogas to fuel it rather than fossil fuels, but also potentially using batteries, which I'll talk a little bit about now when I come on to some of the strategies across the board. So what's our strategy? Well, our strategy is fourfold. We need to reduce, and we completely agree that we need to design and operate our assets so they emit as little carbon as possible. And we also need to make sure that anything we do create, we try and mitigate the use of that through other means, such as carbon capture and various other approaches we can do. We need to move towards decarbonising and using zero carbon technologies. And there's a lot of opportunities out there. Electrical vehicles are one of the clearer ones, but also heat pumps, various other technologies that can use to make sure that, whereas in the past we would need to use power and energy to be able to create the activity that we needed to create, in this case, if we can use zero carbon technology, it will make a big difference. We need to grow our export of renewable products. We do have a fantastic resource. The whole of the water industry has a fantastic resource. And we do need to make sure that we grow solar, wind, and biogas. And as an absolute last resort, and it is there, and we will do this if we need to, we will purchase carbon offsets. We don't really want to go down that way. We think that's sort of a bit of a cheat, if you like. We should be responsible for our own carbon emissions and make sure that we take accountability for that and actually drive down our operational emissions to below zero as best we can without having to rely on offsets elsewhere. Now, natural capital solutions, which is one of the big drivers as well, because it helps biodiversity and it helps the ecological emergency that was also declared by CIWEM, is a good way of getting both benefits, but it won't get to the sort of level of decarbonisation that we need. We just need to take as many opportunities as we can. And you'll see there that we're driving through optimising, investing, displacing old carbon technologies with new approaches. We are looking at our contracts and our goods and services in terms of our supply chain and making sure that we buy low carbon services, and innovation I'll talk about a little bit, because we still need to innovate to be able to get there. And one of the great things about setting an ambitious target like zero carbon by 2030 is it drives the whole industry and all the thought leaders to a single goal, and you start looking at all the opportunities in which you can actually find low carbon technology and low carbon approaches. So this is where our net negative potential comes from. So this is where the tons of kilotons, of CO2 equivalent are based around. We believe, from the 258 1920 numbers, we have the potential to go to 142 net negative if all of this comes off. So we have a little bit of opportunity, but it becomes more difficult as we get there. So as you optimize, invest, displace, etc., it actually becomes more difficult and less certain that we'll be able to achieve it. The orange circles there are showing where all our biogas opportunities are. And 60% of our opportunity to achieve where we need to get to is around biogas. So we do use still fossil fuels in our boilers to make sure that we keep warm digesters to digest our sludge. We need to look at capturing methane and using advanced digestion. So mesophilic digestion, which is digesting the solids that come off a wastewater treatment works at 35 degrees, is the standard digestion approach. We also use thermophilic, which goes up to 65 degrees, a bit more high pressure. We also split some of the material to make sure we get more gas. That really provides the amount of biomethane that we can get out of our sludge as an asset, which we can then use elsewhere. And you'll see that by displacing some of the activities that we do with biomethane really helps generate where we're going. And that a lot of that is gas to grid. So by putting gas to grid, which I'll talk about a little bit more detail, is really generating additional carbon opportunities. And you'll see there that we've got biogas in for our heavy vehicles. So whereas electric vehicles are definitely appropriate for our small van fleet, for our bigger vehicles, our sludge tankers and those types of we have a lot of big plant for our slow sand filters to make sure that we can take sand out of our slow sand filters. We're looking at sort of changing that to biogas as well. And then you can see some of the other activities that we're looking at across the board. And again, I will talk a little bit about some of those as we go through. But it's both the key message on this slide is that our biggest potential comes from biogas and biomethane. So using biogas differently, it really drives our carbon value by using biogas. So currently, what we tend to do with the gas that we generate, occasionally we vent it to atmosphere, which is just a waste for a whole number of different reasons, and it's not environmentally sensitive to do, but that doesn't happen very often. CHP today, combined heat and power, is one of the key ways in which we keep our digesters going, and we have the heat and the power that we then use on our sites genuinely. Sometimes it goes off site, but then tends to use on site. By changing biomethane, we actually get significantly greater carbon benefit. In fact, 5 times just by changing it, and 9 times if we start doing some carbon capture. For example, if we start taking some of the carbon dioxide that's created through our processes and feeding it back into digesters, we get a great opportunity to be able to sort of really multiply the carbon benefit, because less and less is being produced and released to the atmosphere. And we're really looking at using heat pumps to try and make sure that we can use the differential of temperature. So basically heat pumps has normally water of 2 different temperatures, and they use the differential between those temperatures to create that energy to be able to create heat that can go and do our boilers and really sort of promote that treatment process there. So all that is really creating a biomethane multiplier that just continually unlocks carbon savings through more technology and more approaches. So that's why biogas is such an essential part of our overall strategy to make sure that we can drive this net negative approach. It's also important to note that we're not going to get there just with biomethane. And you'll see just in time biomethane, that's us replacing our assets with the 2030 target in place. We would still have a shortfall of about 34 kilotons just by biomethane. We do need to look at and drive innovations. And the types of innovations we're looking at are heat pumps, which I've mentioned, carbon capture, both in terms of emissions coming off our open tanks, whether it be secondary digesters or where we bubble air into our treatment processes. We actually believe there's a big advantage of feeding that carbon into our digesters as well to just continually get that greater methane. Looking at what we can do with sludge products. We already make bricks from our incinerator ash at one of our treatment works, but other opportunities to look at sludge products. It's often used as a fertilizer on land as part of the circular economy. So sludge is a great resource. As long as we can remove the pathogens, we should make sure that we really optimize the use of that resource. Talked about biomethane at HGVs. Anaerobic sewage treatment is something that I'm particularly passionate about, because I think this is the step change in wastewater treatment. As I've been saying, what we tend to do with our wastewater treatment is we use bacteria to treat the wastewater. Bacteria need oxygen to be able to stay alive and healthy, particularly at the concentrations we have. And activated sludge, which is basically big tanks of water with lots of bacteria in them, that's where we add a lot of our energy to make sure that they're aerated and they keep healthy. If we can go down to an anaerobic approach, not only do we need far less energy, we do need to have extra heat, and that's where heat pumps comes in. But we also get less sludge, so we get less waste product and we get more methane, which is another way of actually really driving our approach to decarbonising the grid and making sure that we have low carbon fuels for all of us. And we are always welcome for more ideas, and there'll be a little bit of a link coming up later in terms of if you've got any ideas and you're looking for us to maybe sort of use those, or you're interested in other ideas that we're doing, I'll send, there's a little email address. And Ofwat in the UK, which is the Office of Water Regulation, they regulate the monopolies that are the water companies in the UK, England and Wales. They have an innovation fund. They've put up £200 million to say where we're going to innovate for the best use of our customers and for the planet and the environment sustainability. And some of these ideas are being funded, and we're going to be looking at how to drive them forward through using that innovation fund. We're also putting in quite a lot of our own sort of effort, financial effort, manpower effort, and mental effort to make sure that we really drive this as one of our key tenets of the strategy going forward. So what does it look like in a bit more practice? So this little diagram actually shows where we're going to get a lot of the benefits from by 2030 and beyond. So some of these I've already talked about, so I'm just going to pick out a couple of the other ones. I will say that driving efficiency is always going to be important, and we'll always be driving that. Logistics and behaviours. The way that we've changed the virtual world and the way that we're doing less commuting and all those types of aspects has really made a big effect. And actually, we are looking at how do we optimize travel time for our maintenance technicians, and how we make sure that we optimize all the aspects that we need to do in terms of driving around the place to make sure logistics are right. And the behaviors of people are really important to sort of improve that. And it's just the right thing to do. People tend to feel better as well if they're doing the right thing. I wanted to mention our supply chain, just to sort of highlight that. There's a whole areas of our supply chain. There's not just the people who sort of do the core services. We're also looking for our supply chain to really drive innovation. You'll see battery powered and mobile plant is there. Batteries are a great opportunity for us. The technology is not quite there yet, but we think it will be. What batteries do is when you've got renewable energy, you often have too much energy being created. So what you can do with it is actually store it in batteries, and then you can release it from the batteries at a later stage when you need it. It's quite a good way of mitigating cost as well, because of the variabilities of pricing half hourly on the grid. But one of the key things that we're really interested on batteries is as the electricity in the grid decarbonizes, the quality of the power becomes less reliable. And so with a lot of our kit, and some of it's quite old, what happens is if the frequencies aren't there, it tends to trip. That obviously causes us problems with not treating what we need to treat and has an impact on our customers. Batteries are a great way of making a reliable power supply to be able to make sure that we trip less. So not only does it provide a carbon benefit, it creates a really big operational benefit for our customers. The other thing about electric vehicles I'll just touch on, not so much about the vehicles, but the infrastructure associated with those vehicles and charging those vehicles. We have a big land mass, and as I say, we have opportunities to generate quite a lot of electricity. We are looking to roll out infrastructure for charging the vehicles of London and the southeast and all the way across to the Thames Valley within our region, to make sure that anybody has the opportunity to come onto our sites and actually charge their vehicles. It helps general move towards electric vehicles in general, so you get as many charging points as you've got petrol stations now, if not more. And actually, it's a great way of making sure that we use our power in a reliable way. And if you can use our power directly into vehicles, so we're driving the change. We're not. One of the things I wanted to just highlight. Oops, sorry, my internet's unstable. Hopefully that will disappear. That's one of the problems of the virtual world when it starts getting to 6 o'clock. We have a regulatory regime in England and Wales. PR24 is the price review 24. That's what sets the prices for customers between 2025 and 2030. It's going to be really, really important that we build in a lot of the low carbon technologies and the approach to carbon to really drive that going forward. A lot of the money is not necessarily new money, it's refocused money. There is some additional monies that we think we're going to need to acquire to achieve this target. But some of it is bringing forward asset replacement that we would do anyway, but maybe in 2035. And some of it is, instead of investing in one type of technology, we're investing in a different low carbon technology. So, decarbonising doesn't necessarily have to cost a huge amount of money. But the other thing that we're looking at is starting to really report on where we are with embedded carbon. And in 2022-23, which is now only 11 months away, incredibly, Ofwat are going to be having mandatory requirements for us to report our embedded carbon as well as our operational emissions. And having that baseline in terms of where we're going is what's going to ultimately say, and we're going to have a net zero across our embedded and operational carbon by such a date. I'm hoping it's going to be something like 2040. But people are working on that at the moment to understand where we are and what we're doing. So it's not only being driven by the regulator, we all believe this is the right thing to do. And as a result, it's a really exciting thing to be involved in when so many people are pushing in the same direction. Finally, my sort of last slide on this is it is a huge challenge, it's an urgent challenge, but we actually believe that, you know, we have the opportunity to go negative. And it's one of those great things that people really get behind. We have the plan that I've been through in terms of we have a stage by stage, different elements. It's multiple faceted. It's not just one thing that's going to achieve this. Innovation is going to be key, and we need to drive that innovation to be able to find that gap and really sort of take it forward in terms of driving negative. And one of the key things that you'll find certainly in the UK is that it's often people that are one of the limiting factors for actually getting things done. So we really already have a team that happens to report to me that was really driving the plan, which is being collaborative across the business, using colleagues from across the business that really want to be involved in this as well. And we're already seeing reductions. You know, our carbon footprint last year was lower than the year before again. And a plug for any great ideas, because we're always out there for great ideas, is there's the contact that if you want to get in touch with anybody or learn a little bit more, thinkcarbon@thameswater.co.uk. And our journey to net zero is going to be announced. Our route map is coming out, and Sarah Bentley, our CEO there, is just introducing it in terms of saying just how vital it is for everybody on the planet, but how Thames really are going to be leading the charge to make sure that we can drive you know, a net negative approach to operational carbon in the water industry. And with that, that's about my half an hour. I'm just going to go back up to the front page. So we've got something on the screen, and David is going to lead us through a Q&A session.
Happy to do so, and that was really interesting, Andy. Thank you for that. You know, again, great to see the data-driven approach from Thames Water. You know, bringing it down to the kilotons and the sources. You know, quantifying the carbon emissions from each source, and then letting that shape your investment plan. Fabulous. So look, you know, I'm going to go straight to questions. I've got a few thoughts, but I think some of these will actually be picked up into questions. And thank you to the attendees who are posting questions in the Q&A function. Please feel free to do so. I'm going to triage these questions at you, Andy, and we're going to start with some broad ones. We're actually going to start with a comment from Ian Watt. By the way, just pointing out that Scottish Water's target is also 2040. And although there's no comment here, I can tell you that the Water UK, whilst it might include Scottish Water and Welsh and so on, and Northern Ireland, I don't believe Irish Water are part of them. Okay, so look, the next one, and I'm going to start with some broad questions, Andy. There are some specific ones about your presentation, but to start broad, another question from Ian Watt about decarbonising. So to what extent do you think ambitions are running ahead of the technology and the supply chain capability?
Well, I think it is running ahead, but I think it has to run ahead. I think you have to set those ambitious targets for the supply chain, the technology to catch up. I sort of referred to Elon Musk's comment from a few years ago saying we're going to have a colonized settlement on Mars by 2040, I think, or 2050, he actually put it in there. Without sort of making that type of really grand statement, it's a bit more difficult to corral everything around it to really focus and go after it. So I'm not sure it's all there, but without such a sharp vision and a deadline associated with it, I don't think it would get there. I do think the supply chain, the technology will accelerate because we've got those types of targets that have been announced. Okay.
Thanks, Andy. I know there's a few about net zero, hitting net zero, going net negative. And I'm going to start with another one from Ian. So do you think that investment emissions should be included in targets to be net zero?
Investment emissions. You might have to explain that term to me.
I wonder, is this, and Ian, feel free to add a question and elaborate it, but if you're switching to EVs, for example, is there investment there? If you're probably more significant is your biogas, that's such a significant part of it. And so, there's, yeah, go ahead.
So in terms of the carbon associated with the investment and the assets that we're creating, yes, it absolutely has to be part of it. That's part of the embedded carbon element of it. There is quite a lot of debate out there at the moment about electric vehicles. And are electric vehicles really carbon neutral when you take into account, or carbon zero, when you take into account the construction costs, particularly of the battery, and then the disposal cost of that battery? I've seen both stories, and good arguments both ways on that. What I'd say is that by driving the technology, it will get better and better, and that the carbon footprint will be less and less, and batteries will get better and smaller and require less. So it's all going in the right direction. Embedded carbon in things like our capital programs for enhancing assets, as I said, is something that's going to be coming along, and we're really going to have to look at that as well. And I suppose the other thing, when you first said investment carbon, I was thinking about our investors investing money and where are they going to be looking to invest their money going forward. We already have investors within Thames who are in Thames because of the greenness of the fact that it's basically looking to drive the green economy. And I do think that's a very important part as well to encourage. And the more investment we can get focused on the green economy, the more likely it is, again, that we're going to generate the necessary carbon reductions that we have to achieve.
Okay. So next one, Andy, and we might go into some details. So someone has referred to your chart on slide 7 and asked, how does the purchase of green electricity result in negative emissions?
This one here. Yes. So this is the Water UK graph. Mm-hmm. What this is just trying to say is that our gross emissions here are the 3 million tons of CO2, but our net emissions are, as a water industry, are about 2.4, because the 0.6 is green purchased electricity. So so it's not actually a net amount of carbon. It's just saying that it's offsetting some of the gross emissions on the top line.
Yeah, got it. So your top line is about, did you say about 3? You have 0.6 that you get credit, if you like, from your green electricity, and that brings it down to just under 2.5. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. And look, while we're in the specifics, I mean, a few more specific questions, then people seem interested. How much of your electricity use are you currently generating in-house within Thames Water?
So we generate about 25% in-house. So we actually use more electricity than Malawi. It's a huge amount. We're 2% of the national grid in the UK, which is an incredible percentage when you think about it. And we create sort of, as I said, about 25% of it. It's growing every year. We should be around about 33% by the end of the AMP, by 2025.
Thank you, Andy. Wow, the questions are coming in now, and we may not get through all of them, but let me see how many we can get through. There's one I need to call out, and it's a clarification. Thank you, Robert Kennedy. Irish Water apparently is an associate member of Water UK, so it's great to clarify that. Okay, the gas grid, and you talked a little bit about gas to grid. So someone who, Ben, has asked, are you able to model future decarbonisation of the gas grid?
We have done some of that, and obviously, if you decarbonise the gas grid completely, then we can still use gas to heat some of our boilers and some of the other aspects of that. We haven't really touched on the hydrogen economy here in this presentation either. but that is something beyond 2030 that is a really important part of decarbonising the grid. And biomethane is actually a step along the way to creating that carbon. I'm actually going to the UK Parliamentary Committee on Energy Studies in a couple of weeks' time to give evidence about how we can decarbonise the grid by using some of the emissions from the water industry. I think that we could probably get up to 30-35% decarbonised gas grid if everybody in the water industry put their gas to grid activities. We've got some big schemes ongoing right now today, spending millions of pounds on it to make sure that we really sort of put this forward. Other water companies are as well. But to really decarbonise our natural gas grid, the hydrogen economy is what needs to be really taken off. And I did see actually something today, Northern Ireland are presenting something. They've just got, Northern Ireland Water have got a £5 million grant to look at how they can use excess renewable energy to create hydrogen to try and drive the hydrogen economy in Northern Ireland.
Interesting that hydrogen is caught with there. Okay, here's an interesting one, Andy, from Martin Jones, and thank you, Martin. In my day, the holy grail was to get the economic level of leakage, but public opinion has always found this unacceptably high. Will net emissions make the leakage target surrogate zero?
I'd love to do zero. We were talking about this today, actually. The economic level of leakage was a bit of a wheeze of the early days of regulation in our view. And you're quite right, it just wasn't acceptable to the public. The public just couldn't understand why a third or 40% or even 50% of the water that was being produced was leaking out of pipes. It was just absurd. So the targets now are set in a very different way, and it's constant improvements associated with it. We're now less than 25% in Thames. We hit our leakage target for the first time ever, I think, at the end of 2020, which is great. We did it again last year. For me, will we ever get down to zero leakage? I think we will. We were talking about Manila actually today. Manila, by all accounts, have got down to 3% leakage across their whole city, which shows it can be done. One of the things you need to do, though, is to completely replace your pipes and to go down a gas type grid route of having plastic pipes everywhere and no leakage acceptable. That's a huge investment, a huge investment. So it will come, and one of the things that we're looking at in our drainage areas, our DMAs, as we call them, it's the way we manage our drainage, our drinking water areas, is to make sure that if we're going to replace some of the mains in there, we replace more than 95% of them. Because if you just replace less than that, the bits you replace are fine, but the old bits still keep popping. So you have to go in and really replace the whole lot in a particular area, and then you get huge increases or decreases in leakage. And that type of approach will come more and more.
Okay. Andy, and I've got just a few questions getting upvoted here, so let's go to them. One from Yuan. How do you plan to reduce the nitrous oxide emissions?
Well, fundamentally by capturing them and cleaning them. I don't think we're going to reduce the creation of them, mainly because it comes out of nitrification and denitrification to reduce ammonia and nitrate going into our rivers, and it is unacceptable to not do that. So we will basically capture it probably off our treatment works in some form. We're looking at ways of putting it into our digesters and seeing if that reduces the nitrous oxide, or finding other ways to scrub it before it goes into the atmosphere.
Okay. And next one is about innovation. So does collaboration between water companies all over the country have an impact on how innovation can overcome the barriers to achieve net zero? And how important is that for Thames Water?
It's vital. It's really important. The last thing we want to do is to have us all doing it individually. And that's really one of the central bits of the Ofwat Innovation Fund, the £200 million that I mentioned earlier. The really big innovation opportunities tend to be led by a single water company. There's a lead water company, but several others, if not all of them, will be supporting it as well. And UCWIR, which is the UK Water Industry Research Group, which I'm also sit on the board of that, that is all about making sure we have collaborative research in the water industry. Without it, we wouldn't get there. And we keep on trying, even though we've got what we call comparative competition in the UK, we're not really competitors. We have to work together to be able to achieve some of these targets.
Okay, thank you. So here's an interesting one, and I'm sure this is something your consumers are asking your customers and the consumers. How much will the program cost me and my Thames water bill?
Well, bills have been driven down all the time, year on year, and actually we believe that our customers are willing to pay a little bit more to make sure that they achieve all these things. How much more? Well, Scottish Water in their recent price review got a little bit of extra money to be able to, a few pounds a year, tens of pounds a year, to make sure that they can drive their carbon agenda. I think that will come. Bills are always going to be important, but we do know that with the changing environment and how important environmental protection and drinking water is, that we are likely to see a small increase in bills going forward. But bills compared to gas and electric are tiny for water. Not tiny is maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but they're much smaller. And there's a lot of work that we do around water poverty and making sure there's an affordability element and helping our customers that are less able to afford it. But it's really important to make sure that we are properly funded to achieve these globally important ambitions. The government, the target to be net zero by 2050, we're essential to be able to help achieve that. So in some ways that does need to be funded. I also just think that there's not actually that much more money to be able to do it. We're currently sort of looking at those sort of numbers, and it's just a case of refocusing that investment. Instead of replacing old assets with old technology, we replace those old assets that need to be replaced anyway. We replace it with new technology, which is focusing on carbon.
Okay, and I'm struggling here, Andy, because the questions are coming in faster than we're getting through them. And we may have to take these questions offline. There's one more that's been upvoted here. I'm just going to give you more of an innovation or technologically focused one. How difficult is it to shift from aerobic to anaerobic digestion? And just as an extension of this, what is the typical technology lifetime? When should the decision for a shift be made to be compliant by 2030?
Also, anaerobic sewage treatment, I think, is not going to be central to 2030. I think it will help. I just think that that's the way that we need to go for, in the longer term future. It's quite difficult. And what we need to really establish is how we can convert our current assets if we need to. There's a couple of big projects going on, one with Welsh Water, one with Anglian Water, that we're all sort of working together with. And again, I know there's a big proposal going into the Ofwat Innovation Fund to try and run that, to actually answer those types of questions. So one of the big issues with anaerobic sewage treatment is making sure that you keep the temperatures up. And that's why it hasn't really been viable in temperate climates around the world. But if we can start finding other ways of keeping wastewater warm and warming it up for that type of technology, which is in itself carbon neutral or free of carbon, then I think there are future opportunities. But we're talking really 15, 20 years at least before we sort of make a major change towards being anaerobic rather than aerobic.
Okay. And to come out of the deep technological focus in the water industry and to, I suppose, extrapolate what you've learned, Andy, how do you think Thames Water's experience and learnings at driving towards net zero could be applied to other companies or even other industries looking to do the same?
So I think a lot of industries are already looking to do the same. I think one of the key learning points is having an industry-wide target that everybody's signed up to and believes in. I do think that's really important, and announce it to the world. Because once you've announced it to the world, there's sort of like a compelling argument for making sure that you've honoured what you've said. I think that's vital. The other thing is to really corral the already great sort of enthusiasm and resource in our people to drive this forward. There's a lot of people there that want to do the right thing. And if you sort of give them a direction, then they're more than willing to put in their personal effort to be able to achieve this. And I think that would be true for whatever industry we're looking at. So I'd say those are the two most important things, is setting that vision as an industry and then engaging and empowering everybody to sort of drive towards that goal.
Interesting. Yeah, and interesting, the theme of people has come up a number of times in your talk. Okay, and then just one comment, and this is a additional insight into the Irish water, I suppose, tie-in or connection with the Water UK industry. So thanks, Robert, for this further update. We in Irish Water are processing waterworks sludge through wastewater treatment. This is resulting in reductions in the use of ferric sulfate for phosphorus removal through the use of residual alum. And we're also reducing transport costs and disposal impact. And this project won the Water UK Industry Award for optimization in 2020. So it's interesting that that's more of this collaboration. It's happening right across boundaries here.
Yeah, very interesting.
Okay, so wow, folks, I'm looking at the time. I'm halfway through the questions, but it's 7 o'clock. I know we had booked an hour of your time, and it's a lovely sunny evening. It certainly is in Cork. So I think I should wrap this up, and I apologize to, the 16 questions I didn't get to. We've answered 16, and well done, Andy. That was a bit of a quick fire for the last 20 minutes there. So we have these questions, Andy. We might take them offline. I'm not sure, is there some space you have or that Thames Water have where you could post these, or maybe SciWem have? So look, we have the questions, they won't be lost. But I'm going to park it up there for now, if I may, and bring proceedings to a close. So I'd like once again to thank Andy for a really insightful talk, and I think the extent of questions has shown the level of engagement there, Andy. That's very much appreciated. I would like to just finally mention a few of the upcoming events that we have coming up. So we heard Laura mention at the outset the next webinar in this series being run by the SciWem Republic of Ireland branch. That's happening next month on the 19th of May, and it is focused on phosphorus recovery and reuse. And so that's a panel discussion. There are a number of other courses being run by SciWem head office in Saffron Hill. And so there's a few events I'd like to call out. So there's a significant conference happening in June through late June, early July, the Flood and Coastal Conference. And Barbara might put details of that in the chat for us. There are also some additional SciWem events happening in other branch events that will be available online next month relating to the climate and ecological emergency. There's one on decarbonizing gas. So that's very interesting. One of the questions that came up this evening, and another one on rewilding, which is something that Andy had referred to. SciWem have a range of learning and development courses. One that's coming up and being run through this summer and the autumn is one on environmental economics that may be of interest to some of you folks. So that's enough on the courses. And with that, I'd like to thank the attendees for joining us this evening and for all of your engagement. Thank you once again, Andy. And with that, I'd like to close the event.
Thank you.
Andy, are you still there?
I am.
I just want to say thank you very much. I think the last 21 participants have probably gone off for dinner and left their computer on. I just want to say thank you so much. It was really, really interesting, and I got lots of great questions. Sorry, Dave, I feel like you were getting attacked there with questions.
We're still recording, by the way. I don't know if we need to before we. Yeah, no, I just was going to say that those additional questions, if you fire them through to me, I'm quite happy to write them up and put my answers in and fire them back.
Okay. Do you have a space, Andy, that like maybe the SciWem could forward a link to people who are at the event if they want to see the answers? Does Thames Water have a space?
I don't know. I mean, it'd be best if it was a SciWem space.
SciWem certainly would have a space. Yeah, I mean, whether it's on the website or I'm sure we could find a space on the SciWem.
Because I can produce a report for you from Zoom of all the questions. So if I send those to you, if I send you the report, Andy, then you can have a look at those questions. And then
okay. Just everything said about the recording, releasing the recording. It would be great to see the recording and just share it with some of our corporate comms people at Thames, just to make sure that I haven't said anything that I shouldn't have said through that before it's released.
Also, on that note, Andy, isn't it true that you don't want this put up online for a period? Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's right. Until we've announced the roadmap, which will be next month. But on the video itself, it would be good if I can just sort of run through my corporate comms people as well.
That's brilliant. I've already mentioned to Jane to hold back on putting it up on the website. You can send a copy.
Sorry, Barbara. Can you? It's difficult to hear you again.
Can you hear me now?
I think you live in a submarine, Barbara.
I've spoken to Jane, and I can get her to send you the recording.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Well, Andy, thank you so much for giving us your time, your effort, your energy, because I know really these things are a bit of a pain in the neck. So I really appreciate it. And SciWem Republic of Ireland really appreciates it.
Yeah, no problem. It's always enjoyable doing these things. It's a great topic.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. And David, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For getting dragged in kind of last moment. I don't even know if you knew until you arrived at the trial event that you were doing it. So thank you very much.
Happy to do so. Listen, well done, Laura and Barbara for organising a great event, and well done to the branch.
Great. Everyone have a lovely week. Enjoy your dinner.
Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Evening all.
Bye. Bye.
Cheers.